So hello and welcome back, everybody. After that fantastic opening from the conference, from our speakers in the opening ceremony, and of course, following the fantastic keynote from Chairman Pai, we're delighted now to move on to the first panel of the conference. So our first panel is going to be, is entitled "A Review of Key Spectrum Management Goals, Principles, Challenges, and Best Practices." And I think the idea really here is to set the scene for some of the rest of the sessions that are due to follow by looking at some of the challenges and opportunities facing future spectrum management practices. So it's my pleasure to now welcome to the stage Blair Levin. Blair, welcome. It's great to have you with us, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers from all over the world who are going to be giving their perspectives on some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that they see facing spectrum managers now and into the future. So that said, I would like to pass over to yourself, and we're looking forward to the session. So welcome again, and over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be here with everybody. We have a terrific panel today representing very diverse countries with very diverse issues and approaches to how we make sure that spectrum works for all of their constituencies. We're delighted to have Philip Marnick, who's the Group Director of Spectrum for Ofcom in Britain, Luong Truong, who is the Radio Frequency Policy and Planning with the Radio Frequency Policy and Planning Division of the Regulator for Vietnam, Daniel Oben, who is the Chairman of the Radio Communications Advisory Group, also with ITU and the National Communications Secretariat of Kenya, and Xochitl Hernandez, who's the Deputy Director of Radio Communications of IFT in Mexico. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start with some short opening comments. First, we're going to start with Philip. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed to the organisers for inviting me. I do wish, sitting here in a very cold Britain in the middle of winter, wish that I was in the Persian Gulf, but through the magic of wireless and the internet, we can arrive from anywhere in the world. For me, spectrum management is constantly changing. IMT 2020 5G is actually one of the things that's causing it to change. For many in the world of spectrum management, the mere mention of IMT is a worry. It feels that there's a never-ending desire to take more and more spectrum for the mobile sector and take it away from everywhere else. So an awful lot of our spectrum management is how do we make things to work together? And in the WRC and the ITU processes, how do we make sure that all sectors and all industries have access to the spectrum they need? But it's also a challenge for us in the sense that actually, even in the world of mobile, the world has fundamentally changed. In our early days, we were looking to see how we got coverage, how people could use and make voice calls, not just at home, wherever they wanted to go, but around the world with roaming and everything else. Then how could they do it for data? How could your apps move with you? How could the changes occur? As we move into the world of 5G, those issues are changing again. For us, there's more and more of it is industrial use, whether it's farming, whether it's in factories, whether it's in the oil industry, whether it's in the airline industry, or wherever. There's actually the usage for industry by industry. There's also the usage for all of us as we go about doing what we need to do. New applications will come. So for us in the world of spectrum management, we need to think in the future, not just how we make IMT spectrum available for the mobile sector to provide its services, but how we make it available to other users to enable more local solutions to be produced, to enable spectrum to use at the point it's needed for industry to do the new things that are guiding it. This means there'll be an increasing amount of sharing needed, sharing of spectrum between users to different users with local licensing. In the UK, we fundamentally changed our framework. Yes, we'll make spectrum available for national licenses to enable all those services, but we'll also make mobile bands available for local licenses at the point it's needed direct to industry, direct to users. This has other benefits. We no longer need to wait for national rollouts to occur for those people in the most remote areas to be last to get spectrum, to be able to get access to new services. Because people in those areas will be able to get spectrum themselves and provide local networks, whether it's farming, forestry, marine usage for fishing, etc., to enable people to do it. In the ITU world as well, at the WRCs, we also need to think about how we change our mentality to make sharing more the norm, more a usage, change the philosophy from it's my bit of spectrum, how do I protect it, to one is other people need to use it, how do I enable usage? So one from keep off the grass to one where how do we make things work? So for us, we see the massive change in IMT being a change going towards the future of more sharing, more usage, and more availability of spectrum for all spectrum users, less for fighting and more of a collaboration of usage. Very hard. We also need to ask ourselves whether the IMT tag actually is a problem or a help. The IMT tag for many places for people says, I must give spectrum to mobile, it must be in this particular way, I must allocate this way. Do we need to change the philosophy of what we do, or do we need to change the philosophy at the ITU level as well? Do we need to think about spectrum from mobile instead of just IMT? Because every time we say IMT, people worry and don't actually look to see how it works. So for us, the trends are changing. We need to think about how we make spectrum locally available, how we make spectrum available to share, how we make spectrum available in ways that all people can get access to it when they want, and actually see if we can change our mindset to a mindset of actually, how do I make something work, as opposed to how do I stop someone else getting spectrum? Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Philip. And now on to you, Luong. Go ahead.
Okay. So I have a 5 minute for introduce my Vietnam case study. So can I how to show my slides? Okay, thank you. Okay, firstly, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting us in the conference. So my presentation on the challenger on spectrum planning for IMT 2020 in Vietnam. I'm Trương, come from the Authority of Radio Frequency Management. So please next. Okay, firstly, I would like to provide some very short information about the mobile market in Vietnam. We have 5 operators with total 127 million subscribers. Among them, about 50% is 3G and 4G subscribers. So we took first 5G call last year, and we have just granted 5G commercial trial in November for 3 operators. Yeah, so please next. About our policy on the 5G, we have 3 big steps. First step, we prepare frequency plans. Next step, we will grant trial test license. And final, we will license commercial 5G network of operator. At the moment, we now have a license trial test and propose band plan. Next. About 5G band plan, we focus both on existing IMT bands and new IMT bands. Because of 4G will remain a very important role in next 5 years, so it's important to remain spectrum for 4G. As for existing IMT bands, we unable to deploy 4G and 5G. We also consider reform band 9 MHz for complying with the 4G and 5G with the block size of 5 MHz. And we focus on TDD band plan for both the 4G and 5G, and allow operator can smoothly transiting from the 4G to 5G S-band 2600 MHz band. We are refarming from the FTD band 7 to the TDD band 41. For new IMT band, of course, we focus on the key candidate bands for 5G, but we now are studying on the sharing and compatibility to the incumbent system, because we need to protect some very important system, especially some fixed satellite system. Please next. C-band, yeah, as you know, is very important band for 5G, and Vietnam also considered as a key band for 5G. So we decided to reform this band for both IMT and FFS system. For IMT, we will use the band from 3560 to 4000 MHz for IMT, and fixed satellite system we have two sub-band from the 3400 to 3560 MHz and 40 to 4200 MHz. There are some conditions for both systems. For IMT, OBUE limits will comply to 3GP Cat B, and spirit emission will be limited below minus 52 dBm per megahertz. But stated also must protect the TT&C in some specific zone. For fixed line system, we require all earth station must to be installed bandpass filter to avoid high power from the IMT base station. Please next. And the last one, we also prepare some spectrum for develop both 4G and 5G for accurate coverage, also the high speed. Sub-gigahertz, we have 700 megahertz band with the APT FDD low duplexer. And we also have bandband in millimeter wave from the 24.3 to 27.5 TTD. One operator can acquire up to 1.2 gigahertz in millimeter wave. Okay, that's a very short information we would like to introduce to you about the Vietnam case study. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So from England, we've heard about how it is that some of the questions that we need to think about, particularly as we try to share and enable different use cases from Vietnam. We were talking about very specifically how spectrum is being allocated for 5G and what bands they're using and how they're addressing things like the issues with fixed satellites. Daniel, let's turn to you and hear from your perspective in Africa. What are the principles for spectrum management?
Thank you very much, Blair. Colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here, to be amidst such a distinguished group of panelists. Next slide, please. Looking at the principles, these are principles that we generally accepted, and I apologize, I think I tried to squeeze too many principles in one slide. I hope you can still read them. But the first principle for me is the issue of having following global harmonization of spectrum in accordance with what we agree at the World Radio Conferences, because that's the first stop. And then, of course, at the national level, then we have our own obligations. So harmonization is a very important principle. The second principle I'd say is that we need to get value out of spectrum. And this also will come out as a challenge later, because when you talk about the highest value, for me, works for government, I also look at money as a value. So that's an important principle. Managing of the interference is important. I think we need, especially for the region where I come from, where we have very many small countries or countries that are landlocked that need to coordinate interference at their borders. So managing interference, especially along the border point, is a very important principle. Of course, the issue of transparency or an allocation of spectrum is important, and related to to what we are doing now, being on the platform, as Philip said. Other than, I agree with his comments, other than the fact that he's in winter, but you can see I'm wearing a shirt and I don't have any warming in my house. So other than the weather, I think we agree. The connectivity has moved from the office, the school, to the home. And so other than just giving a spectrum for what we've done doing before, we need to look at the issue of education, safety, as well as communication platforms like the one we are using. Again, the issue of a concentration of spectrum in the hands of a few people. I think we need to look at this and see how we can best assign spectrum to allow for other people, more agile, people who are more nimble in terms of how they use spectrum, come in and use the spectrum that's allocated. Because if we don't do this, then you may find that spectrum ends up being in the hands of the very same institutions that have always had spectrum and probably didn't use it very well. Consultation. In Kenya, we are required by our constitution to seek public consultation whenever we are making decisions that affect the public. So public consultation is important. Why I say 5G, because in Kenya we haven't rolled out 5G, so we don't have any 5G stakeholders per se. But I think it's important to make sure that all spectrum users are consulted in this process. Then let's have the next slide. In terms of challenges, as I've said, the first challenge, which is not on my slide, is the one of balancing the requirement for cash in the national treasury against enhancing connectivity. So that balance, I think, has to be that balance has to be struck as we move forward, because with the pandemic, resources are running low. In our region, we have very many bands that have already been allocated for IMT, but the utilization is very low. So instead of looking for more spectrum, is it possible that perhaps we review how we are using spectrum that has already been allocated as per the radio regulations and see how we can apply those? Because, for example, in the UHF band, only half the countries in Africa have used the 700 and the 800 megahertz band. After the deliberations, WR is 12, the really difficult process of migrating from analog digital television. I want to talk about the issue of how much spectrum do we really need for 5G? My position that depends on who you ask. And I want to tell Philip that Ofcom was recently quoted in a meeting of African countries where Ofcom was quoted as saying that they said you don't need 80 megahertz for 5G. I've looked at the report. Actually, Ofcom didn't say that, but it was being used that way. What Ofcom said, Philip can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is no evidence said that you need 80 megahertz. So we are told by industry that you need between 80 and 100 megahertz. But when you look at how people have allocated spectrum, especially saying the 2.6 gigahertz, some have given 40, some have given 20, some have given 30, some have given 100, some have. So where's the truth? I think the truth lies between 20 and 100. So the question I'm asking here as a challenge is, how could we get a clear indication of how much spectrum we need in the low range, mid range, and also in the millimeter wave? And my last point is that our institutions, especially where I come from, were established 20 years ago on the onset of liberalization. I'm positing that perhaps we need to update the regulatory frameworks which were structured to regulate 2G and put in place a new framework that allows for 5G and more flexible use of spectrum. As I mentioned, from coordination to interference, pricing, is it market-based, administrative, and also try for automated monitoring of spectrum. Last slide, please. So, in terms of best practices, my position is that we need to adopt new technology in terms of spectrum management so that we can be able to understand, so that we can be able to make more efficient use of spectrum. I think other colleagues have already mentioned carrier aggregation, dynamic spectrum sharing, licensed versus unlicensed. And this, I think, will bring more flexibility and more efficiency. We also need to benchmark with countries that have already deployed 5G in Asia, in North America, in Europe, as African countries, and see how best, how they use 5G to solve specific problems that are impacting their societies, other than just issuing 5G spectrum for 5G's sake. Again, connectivity was a challenge. For us, as I said, when connectivity moved from school to office to the home, can 5G help resolve that problem by giving educational platform, communication platforms, and address the issue of connectivities which we are facing in rural areas? 80% of our population live in rural areas. So when you talk about connectivity going to the home, we are talking about connecting rural communities. How do we do this with 5G? The 5G network, we are told, will be a wide network. So in terms of content, are we going to get the same content we've been having on these networks, or is there a possibility of actually looking at the content issue even as we look at the 5G networks? With that, I thank you for your attention. I'll be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Very interesting principles and challenges that you've laid out for us. And I think certainly from the perspective of the United States, when you talk about making sure that we've moved from connectivity from the office to the home, we've seen a lot of that, as have a lot of other countries over the last year, as the pandemic accelerated the world of remote everything. So we need connectivity for education, for healthcare, not just in our offices, but in our homes. And now, at least in the United States, about 40% of the workforce is actually working from home with much higher connectivity requirements, whether it be fixed or wireless. With that, let's move on to Xochitl from Mexico. Tell us how the view looks from your regulatory agency.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Good morning and good evening. You know what, for the IFT as a Mexican regulator, it has a particular interest on the spectrum resource. We know that the spectrum as a key asset for wireless communication is having a growing demand due to technological advances and the expected success of the next generation of wireless technologies. So in order to satisfy this demand, it's necessary to keep enhancing the spectrum efficiency, but also is needed the use of additional spectrum resources. So in this matter, satisfying all the growing demand is one of the most important goals and challenges we have. Next slide, please. Thank you. For instance, in Mexico, the IMT spectrum has been tripled. This is in 2014, we have 222 megahertz for IMT. And now in 2020, Mexico has 700 megahertz for IMT. However, there are more challenges to be met. In first place, increase the IMT assigned spectrum to 1171 megahertz. Could you change the slide, please? Thank you. This would be on the short and mid-term. Also deploying next generation networks to provide better quality services such as guaranteed latency, data rate or capacity, and optimizing the use of the radioelectric spectrum, just to name a few. In this regard, the spectrum harmonization is also a key to promote technology innovation, considering the potential of new standards as 5G. We also have to consider their needs in terms of the use of the spectrum in low, mid, and high frequency bands. But we also have to consider the protection to other services in order to mitigate harmful interferences and make the best to assure coexistence between services or implement redeployment processes. A good example in Mexico, next slide, please. Thank you. In a national basis for spectrum management, a good example in Mexico for this redeployment process is the 600 megahertz bands, which was identified for IMT at the WRC. In this redeployment process consisted on moving the TV broadcasting users to a band where they can keep operating. So with this, Mexico finalized the second digital dividend, and the next step that we expect is for the industry to keep developing a mature market for mobile services in this band. And obviously, we will have another part that would be the auctioning of this band. Other example will be the redeployment processes in the 800 megahertz band and the 3.5 gigahertz. But with this, the considerations were different, but the objective was the same. It's making the spectrum available for new services, taking into consideration the use of the band, the prospective use of it, and most important, all the benefits for the public. In this regard, the Institute has planned more auctioning processes, some segments of the 3.5 to the 2.6 gigahertz band, also the 800 megahertz band, PCS and AWS for the next year. Now, in terms of also national spectrum management, it's important to consider perspectives, the perspectives of everybody who is involved or interested on the spectrum planning and the use of this resource. So in 2017, the National Spectrum Committee was created due to the importance of having a space for an open dialogue in spectrum matters. We have an active participation of stakeholders, industry, academy, government entities, and some other interested on the national spectrum management process. And it gave us a positive interaction and a feedback on national and international spectrum issues. This National Spectrum Committee is also a way to provide transparency, but it's not the only way to do so. Public consultations are also essential for the improvements in our regulatory policies by generating better instruments to regulate the telecommunications and broadcasting markets, as well as evaluate the current regulation in order to analyze its effectiveness and efficiency. But even though the process implies people to submit their documents to the Institute, this COVID-19 pandemic have made really big changes. We have to stop some of these processes, but we continue working on this. So at the end, in this year, the IFT, particularly the radioelectric spectrum area, published 7 public consultations regarding spectrum planning, auctions, changing of policies, and renewal of technical parameters. So in conclusion, the Institute has taken best practices for the spectrum management, which results in triplet available spectrum for IMT, facilitating the assignment of the spectrum by auctions, giving transparency to spectrum management processes, and fostering technological advances in Mexico. Hence, it's important to consider the adequate amount of the spectrum that can meet the actual and future needs under appropriate conditions, bearing in mind that it's also had to be affordable. This is very important. So meeting this is a big change. It's a big challenge, and we have to keep working on a national, regional, and international way, hand in hand, in order to achieve it. Just to finish this, I would like to share with you more information if you want to read more about our IMT plans and also the public consultations. So can you pass the? Thank you. This is just web pages. This is all public information. So if you want to consult this information, just for you to know, it's in Spanish. But if you want to know more about this IMT or this public consultation, please be free to consult. Thank you.
Thank you all for that terrific overview of the different issues that you're all facing as each of your countries tries to make sure that the public good of spectrum is utilized in the best way for the country. As Philip started off, one of the challenges is balancing multiple needs, and those are not just use case needs, they're often also geographic needs. Let's drill down in that a little bit and talk about 5G. I think it'd be good to walk through with each of you what do your countries see as the primary use cases for 5G? And also, given those use cases, how do you make sure there's enough spectrum for each of those, particularly balancing the national versus the local 5G use cases? Philip, let's start with you.
So in the UK, all 4 of our mobile operators have a 5G spectrum in the 3.x gigahertz band, and they've all started rolling out services. So 5G services are available. Go and buy your new 5G phone and use it. An awful lot of the services are go faster versions of what you already have on 4G. But also, we've been trialing an awful lot of industrial cases inside factories, on business parks, and fishing, agriculture, etc. And so for us, the challenge is making sure they also have spectrum. So as I said, we've introduced a sharing framework to enable local licenses to be allocated. So the mobile networks are rolling out networks. Some of them are also entering into private agreements to provide private network solutions for people. But we're also making local licenses available in spectrum bands at 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz, 2.3 gigahertz, and other bands, as well as 26 gigahertz, to enable people to be able to use it where they need it. So for us, we've got the big commercial rollouts of big mobile networks delivering. We've also got more local licenses to enable industrial uses, what people call verticals, to be able to use spectrum. And we've made spectrum available for both of those, and both of them are being taken up and used. Our smallest license for those goes from about 50 years. So we're trying to
clarify, are the local licenses primarily sharing licenses as opposed to exclusive use?
Well, the licenses, the spectrum is shared, but the license you get at the point you are is exclusive. So one of the things that you want is if you've got a location, a factory or something, and you want to provide services, you can either use license exempt spectrum, Wi-Fi-ish type stuff, or you can use license spectrum. So we've made local licenses available for you at the point you need it, which are licensed. So fully protected like any other license, and you've got them at that particular locality to enable you to do something. It's not like, say, CBRS in the States, where someone else turns up and you move out of the way. It's effectively your license at that point to be able to do it.
Got it. I think Luong is frozen. If I'm wrong, hopefully he'll come on. But Daniel, let's go to you next. What are the 5G use cases you see, and how do you make sure? We'll come back to Luong in a second. But Daniel, how do you address that same issue of multiple uses, multiple geographies?
Thank you. Just to clarify, we've not issued any 5G frequencies yet or licenses yet. We have 4 mobile operators trying to offer 3G and 4G, and 99.99% of our internet connection is on a mobile platform. So for us, connectivity is a very big motivation for any mobile technologies that come in. But at the national level, we've identified out of the Sustainable Development Goals 4 main areas we are focusing in the next 5 years: affordable healthcare, food security, affordable housing, and manufacturing and jobs for the youth. So if 5G can help us address those 4 national goals out of the SDGs, we would be very happy. But now, as we look at that, my expectation is that if people can come up with solutions, operators, whether they are verticals or actually existing operators, if they come with a case that justifies achievement of those goals, I'm sure they'll be considered very well in terms of being allocated 5G spectrum. Our regulatory authority is in the process of developing a roadmap for release, but the bands are the same: 2.3, 2.6. The C band, which I didn't say a challenge, is defragmented. I don't know whether it's only in Kenya, but C band 3.4, 3.6 is available, but from WiMAX to other radio networks, analog radio networks, it's so defragmented. So if we could defragment that, I think we could be able to provide services. So fixed wireless access using 5G with perhaps routers with Wi-Fi would allow for use of existing devices while actually enjoying the benefits, just like speed that 5G offers. So that would be my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Luong, hopefully you were able to hear that. And the question that we're going through is, what do you see as the 5G use cases, and how do you balance competing needs both from a use case perspective and from a geographic perspective? How is Vietnam doing that? Luong, or can you?
Yes. Okay. As my understand, your question is about the coordination between the 5G and fixed satellite.
Well, it's really about how you balance both the need for different use cases, kind of the national, I think, as Philip said, that classic use case of doing everything just faster, but with other use cases like industries or agriculture, but also that some use cases are national, some use cases are very, very local.
Oh, okay, thank you. In Vietnam, really, we mostly license nationwide for operator, and they can use this band in nationwide. And at the moment, we now consider C-band mostly for EMBB. Yes, and for some IoT or some S-band sub gigahertz, we now consider band 700 for nationwide, and can maximum 3 operator can be licensed this band. Yeah.
Okay. So Sheil, how are you balancing those competing needs in Mexico?
Thank you. Well, in first place, we are making taking the first step of considering this harmonization of very important spectrum frequency bands for 5G. But we are also have to understand and to change the idea of this one size fits all. This is not working anymore. We have to listen to the industry, and we have to listen to also to small industries that have the interest of using the new frequency bands of the spectrum. Maybe their needs will be met by using the 4G frequency bands that we already have. But we know that also some frequency bands wanted to change to 5G. So there's an evolution that we have to be very clear, and we have to make them know, all the industry and all the interested, that this is constantly changes in the frequency planning, and there also if they have some specific needs, and we know that Mexico has a broad territory and have a very different interest in the use of the spectrum. So that's why it's really important for us to have all the comments of all the interested. So these public consultations about the auctioning of the spectrum is really important, because with this we will realize if they really want or if they really need that amount of the spectrum for a specific use, or maybe they need something different. So with this we are not having just one perspective. We are trying to have this flexibility in the spectrum management that is really important, and we are also making this progress and constantly polls and this open forum in this national committee, so they can expose their ideas, and also we can change. Maybe we can adapt for the best our spectrum management.
Great, thank you very much. Let me mention to the audience that There is a chat function that questions can be asked through that function. I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then move to the questions. We already have a few very specific questions from the audience, but audience members should feel free to ask questions, and we'll get to them in just a minute. I want to ask a question related to something, Sochil, you had in your slide, which is I think you used the word redeployment. The question for regulators everywhere is not just how to allocate spectrum, but how to reallocate spectrum. In the United States, and something that I was involved with, we utilized what we called an incentive auction, where we essentially ran two auctions. One, we were paying a bunch of broadcasters in a descending auction to sell us back their spectrum, while at the same time running an auction, an ascending auction, where the mobile operators were bidding on that spectrum. And we were able to allocate 84 megahertz of prime spectrum, made money for the broadcasters, made money for the government. But that was one technique that worked there. It doesn't work everywhere. I'd like to ask everyone, starting with Sochil, what are thoughts about how do we make sure as 5G develops, there's enough spectrum? How do we redeploy other spectrum for that purpose or for other purposes? What are some thoughts about the nature of redeployment? So Jill, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, actually, this is really interesting because we have been redeploying spectrum for the last years to meet some of the needs of 4G operators that now we have in the 800 megahertz bands and the 400 megahertz bands. So this is a process that we are constantly doing in Mexico, and maybe it's not that different that for 5G. It won't be so different, but the thing here is that we have to be very careful of considering the some of the users that already have in some band. For example, at the 3.5 gigahertz band, there are some important users that we cannot redeploy at this moment out of the band. I mean, we made a redeployment in this band, this frequency band, but we are having the same use. We are not using it right now for 5G. So right now we are trying to do our best for the users to keep using these frequency bands they have to keep developing and to try to fostering the innovation, whether they have some services that are not mobile. But we also know that these 5G frequencies, they are not just need mobile frequencies, right? Or mobile uses. We also need fixed. We also need satellite. So I don't think there would be like a competition between services. I think that, in my opinion, there will be some joint ventures that all the companies and all the interested can make so they can deploy 5G in the future. So we have to be really aware of where we're going and what's the interest, and also what's the standardization, mostly how they are working towards to a near future. What's the changes that they are making, so we can also push. So we can make maybe some task force with some of our mobile operators and our satellite and fixed operators to try to make the best decision in this.
Great. Daniel, let's go to you next. How are you looking at that question of redeployment?
Thank you, Blair. I can look at it the same way that Mexico has looked at it. We start with the UHF band, where we had to redeploy the digital broadcasting services to below 694 megahertz, to be precise. So the rest of the band, 800 and 700, was used for 4G. Similarly, for the spectrum that we are now talking for 5G, 2.3, 1.5, 2.6, these used to be used by the government agencies. but the government agencies have been redeployed to other bands. That's why these bands are now available for use for 5G. If you go to the C band, before 2015, we did not have 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz allocated to mobile or to IMT. But the African Telecommunication Union did carry out a study and found that between 3.4 and 3.6, not many countries had, about 20% of the countries had services there. So we made a decision as the African continent to recommend that we allocate that band to IMT. And so there was a need to redeploy those C-band services from 3.6 to 3.4 to 3.6. With the coming of the WRC-23, there's an interesting debate both on 3.6 to 3.8 and the 600 megahertz in the UHF band. So based on studies, based on our national requirements, the redeployment is something that I think we something that we've done, and if the need arises, something that we can do. But it has to be based on studies and also national requirements, and whether that solve our specific needs that, as I mentioned before. But we're sure we would agree to the redeployment based on very concrete and a clear evidence that this brings bigger benefits than if we left it the status quo.
Great. Luong?
Yes.
You address that? I mean, I know it's early in the process for Vietnam because you're just starting off with 5G, but do you have thoughts on redeployment?
You mean in Vietnam now?
Well, are you thinking ahead? Do you have ideas? And if not, we'll move to Philip, and that'll be fine. I just wanted to give you a chance to answer the same question.
Maybe I missed something from. Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, how are you thinking about not just allocating the spectrum, but reallocating spectrum? In other words, taking some back and repurposing it for a different use, as you think about that issue. But if you want us to move on to Philip, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. In Vietnam, we think about the reform some band for 5G because it's a balance. Because we will include balance requirement for some system. For example, fixed satellite system. We have own band 8 megahertz at the moment, but we don't use total. So we need to reform and move some existing user like TVRO or Earth Station, and we release spectrum for new system.
Okay. Yeah. Philip, how is Ofcom thinking about reallocation?
I think that this is the basic function of any of the spectrum regulators. This is spectrum management. It's how you determine what is the optimum use of any band of spectrum. As others have said, we've already also cleared 700 megahertz band from television, and as I said, moving television down, repackaging to deliver the same TV, but in less spectrum. And therefore, we made that band available for mobile, and we're just about to auction. We also looked at the band from 3.4 to 3.8. The lower part of it was used by the military, and we managed to negotiate them moving. And then we looked at the use of satellite in 3.6 to 3.8. Again, looking at what was needed, because you need to provide the satellite services in C-band. And what we decided in that part of the band that we would clear it and then make it available for mobile. We believe in technology neutrality, so we don't have spectrum for 2G, 3G, 4G, or 5G. It's just spectrum for mobile, and actually technology neutral across it. I think the other challenge as well, as you mentioned in auctions, Auctions for us are not about raising money. It's in fact not one of our duties to raise money from auctions. We use auctions purely to identify who has the highest value user and therefore enable it to go there. So we don't have any role to raise money, which is some other people do different views. So I think for us, it's actually looking at demand for different services, looking at bits of spectrum and identifying how you manage it in such a way that you can use it going forward for a service, either for one service or another. The band we've also looked at is 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz. Again, really important for satellite services. But in that sort of band, which now has mobile devices and other things available in it, actually we can fit more local licenses in that band around it. So we can use the spectrum for multiple services by enabling us to protect one service, but using it in different places at different powers for others. So for us, the management and moving of users around, considering of how you package people together, is the basic principle of what we do day in, day out.
Great, thank you. I simply have to add from my perspective with 2 stints in the United States government that the law, like Britain, says that the regulator should not consider raising money as important in running spectrum auctions. And then everybody from Congress calls up the regulator and says, you need to raise more money. So there's the law, and then there's political pressure, which always interferes, or always is part of the process, I should say. I'm now going to kind of go through a series of questions that are directed sometimes to an individual that are coming from the audience. One of our audience members wants Philip to answer what bands are assigned for factories and specific uses, I think is the question.
Certainly in that, we've got 2 schemes in place. One is we've actually got some bands in our sharing framework, which we've got some 1800 spectrum, some 2.3 gigahertz spectrum, and the band 3.8 to 4.2, and also some 26 gigahertz spectrum. But also we have another scheme where you can actually ask for a local license in already auctioned mobile spectrum, and then we'll check to see whether that will impact the mobile operators' rollout plans, and we can grant a license for 3 years for that bit of spectrum. But for the more local one, 1800, 2.3, 3842, and 26 gigahertz is in our sharing framework and available for local licenses.
Great. And another couple questions also, these are for Philip. How much 5G spectrum is allocated to each of the 4 operators? And a question for everybody, which is there an important difference between 3 operators and 4 operators? What are people seeing in terms of the competitive nature of the market for that? Philip, let's start with you about how much is allocated to each of the 4, and then we'll go around and talk about that 3 versus 4 question.
So as I said, in the UK, spectrum is allocated by auction. So the amount of spectrum an operator gets is the amount of spectrum it gets from the auction. And our operators have slightly different bits of spectrum depending what they've got in auctions. So they have got spectrum already allocated and rolling out in 3.4 to 3.7 roughly. And we're about to auction another 120 megahertz of the spectrum to 3.8. And then people will decide how much they've got there. But operators have other spectrum, 2.6, 2.3, 900, 800, etc. And again, this spectrum is able to be used for 5G if they want to. That's just a matter of how they decide to refarm and do themselves. So the amount of spectrum the operator has or needs is the amount they've got historically and from auctions.
Yeah, and let's go to this question now of should we be shooting for 4 operators in each market or 3, or kind of what's the number we think? Daniel, let's start with you on this question.
Yes, thank you. It's a difficult question, but let me try. In Kenya, we have 3 operators offering 2G, 3G, and 4G. We have 1 operator offering 4G in 700. A long time ago, we had 4 operators offering 2G, 3G, and 2G and 3G, but that operator closed shop and their assets were dispersed among the 2 that remained. Um, I think when you have more competition, the beneficiary is the citizen. Of course, you don't have to have too many competitors. I think 4 would be a better deal. Our market is a bit different. It's public knowledge that we have one operator that actually controls over 60% of the market. So the conversation that we have is perhaps if we had a 4th operator, this will balance the competition. And that goes to my comment that we need to be careful when we are offering 5G spectrum, that we avoid concentration so that we worsen maybe an already existing competition issue in the market. But I would say the more the merrier, but with limits so that the customer can benefit from competition among the many operators that are there. Thank you.
Sure. So, Chil, Mexico, of course, has a very interesting, unique situation because you have a wholesale network as well. But how do you address that question of how many competitors is the optimal number in the market?
Sure. Yes. Actually, almost for the mobile services, we have the same operators. There are 3 or 4 operators depending on one band, but especially now that I can recall, for the 700 megahertz band, we have this operator, but it's a really interesting kind of work because it's like a joint initiative between the government and another company who is offering a huge coverage in Mexico, and it's already working. So this is really important. We call it red compartida. It's a shared network, and it's in the 700 megahertz band. So with this, we are trying to make to reach all these rural places or most of the places that doesn't have connectivity right now. This is some work that we have been doing with this. With some other entities and government entities, and for this, I think what the aim that we want is to have more than the 90 of the coverage of Mexico. That is huge. Right now, it's huge because most of the operators in other bands are focused more on these cities or urban places. But here with this sharing network would be one of the differences between the allocated spectrum right now. Considering other bands, there would be, for example, the 800 megahertz band. We were using it. We were actioning it the next year, and that would be for broadband, because we have also some other users that they are using it for small slices of the spectrum, but we also want to give chance for the mobile to use it. Right now, we are also not considering that they have to use a special technology. We are neutral technology also, but it will be decided on the next auctioning. So that would depend how many operators we'll have. Well, that would depend also on the auctioning. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to another question coming in from the audience to make sure we can cover as many of these as possible. This one comes from Saudi Arabia, but I think whereas the question is very specific about Saudi Arabia, it really does cover a lot of other countries. In Saudi Arabia, they're wondering, how do we ensure the integrity and security measures in using 5G for industrial cases to encourage Internet of Things devices as well? And particularly, they're concerned about remote sites and in between cities coverage, but also, of course, they have a very specific issue, which is every year Saudi gets the Hajj, which creates a huge number of very crowded areas, but in a very specific location, and a huge number of new users. How do we think about security, integrity, protection of privacy in terms of what kind of regulatory requirements we put on the utilization of spectrum. Philip, let me start with you on that question, and then we'll go around the different folks.
I think security is really important, but it's not a spectrum issue, it's a network issue. And what you've got to make sure is you have the necessary regulatory conditions into security, but also then the operators implement them in a way that ensures it's delivered. And I think that's the key bit of it. I think to his other parts of the question, one of the things we're looking at in industrial use and other places as well is that the factories and the other places want private networks in some cases because they want to maintain the security and want to make sure that their data is kept secret and private. And therefore, they're going that sort of way. There's other ways through slicing and everything. But essentially, the businesses want it, and therefore the businesses are implementing it. For the hydrogen and other things, actually providing local capacity at a local time to meet peak demand is relatively straightforward. It's just making sure the spectrum's available at that point to enable it to be brought to life to deliver capacity.
Would anyone else like to answer that question in terms of security and integrity? If not, we'll move on to another question. Someone from Italy asked, is anyone considering redeployment of the 700, 800, 900 megahertz band in order to improve the effectiveness of their use? I think we've talked about redeployment of some bands, but this is specific on those bands. Anybody on our panel want to talk about that?
Could I quickly, because actually this is the question at WRC 23. The agenda item is actually to consider the band, the UHF band, all the way up to 900 megahertz. And it's to look at it. It's not a let's slice another bit off bit. It is to look at the band to understand how we make the optimum use of that band for all of the services it needs to deploy. And actually, the band plan is a matter for industry to a certain degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. If with Philip's indulgence, I would like to differ with him a little bit, because I think that agenda item is targeting the 600 megahertz. The wording may be looking at the broad range because it was framed in 2015 to make it look palatable. But the way I see it, and this is a personal view, the target is 600 megahertz. But in terms of answering this question from our colleague from Italy, I think 4G is going to be around for a long time. And so 700 and 800 as spectrum that is being used to deploy, and 1800 to deploy 4G may be around for some time. So deployment of those three bands perhaps will take time. Again, this is just a personal view. 900, because this was the original GSM band, it is possible that with regimes like ours and others, Mexico, UK, and I think when technology neutral, maybe, and with the new technology like dynamic spectrum sharing, who knows, maybe 4G may share the spectrum with 5G using new technology, and depending on the demand in a specific area, the two could share these resources for quite some time to a more advanced technology to make sure that we improve effectiveness of their use. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we've covered a lot of topics, and there are obviously a lot of new topics to be covered in the future, including things like splicing and dynamic network sharing. With that, let me turn it back to Dan, who's going to say a few words to wrap up this session. Thank you all. Thanks our panelists very much.
Thank you very much to Blair, and thank you from me to all of our panelists as well. So a fascinating way to start with our first panel. And Blair, you mentioned a few issues there that are going to be covered, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of that over the course of the next few days. But once again, thank you all so much to our panelists, and Blair, thank you for an excellently run session. So thank you all.
Thank you.
So next up, we have a short break. So I mentioned before about the networking part of our platform. So now is an opportunity for you all to make use of that. So we have around about 30 minutes or so. So as I mentioned before, you can network on the platform by visiting the networking area on the left-hand side of your menu bar. If you go into that menu bar, you can click on the ready button. You will then be linked automatically with another person who is on the platform. I just checked, and I think we do at the moment have around about 600 people on the platform. So there's plenty of people to match with. So please do make your way to the networking area. As I said, click on the menu bar on the left-hand side, and then click on ready, and that will link you and give you the opportunity to meet with somebody else who is on the platform. We are then back here in around about 30 minutes time at 16:50, which is Saudi Arabian time, for our next session. So we're going to be starting off then with a presentation, our first thinking point presentation. We're going to have a series of academics providing insights into various aspects of spectrum management throughout the 3 days. And we're going to be starting off, as I said, back here in 30 minutes with the first of those from Martin Weiss from the University of Pittsburgh, before we then move on to our second session, which is going to be looking at developing a sustainable national spectrum strategy. So back here in 30 minutes, but until then, please do make your way over to the networking area and try out that area of the platform. And lastly, I'd like to finish by thanking all of our speakers from that first panel, and as well to all of you out there for the questions and comments that you put across via the chat, which really were great as well, and a big part of the interesting discussion that we had. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you back here in 30 minutes. Thank you.